Welcome to Realcast, the weekly roundup of the real asset markets. I'm joined today by Nicole Dines and Dan Innes. Dan, let's start with you. What were your kind of key picks of the week?
Well, in major retail news last week, there was quite big news for the sandwich chain Pret a Manger. They've won £100 million in funding to double in size. And that's after a year when sales had almost halved and city centre trade, seemed to have all but dried up. But they've been given this £100 million to open up new stores in 5 new countries. And that's funding from Luxembourg-based conglomerate JAB Holdings and Sinclair Beecham. And that's one of their original founders. And that's going to allow them to open up to 200 new stores in the UK and recruit about 3,000 new staff by the end of 2023. The 5 international markets that they're looking to open in, that's compared to markets that they're already in, like the US, France, Hong Kong, and Dubai. But it hasn't quite shortlisted which those countries are going to be just yet. So if you're looking after an asset in some of these new markets without a Pret, then time for you to go and pick up your chicken sub and your elderflower can of drink for lunchtimes. But Pret's, they already have 550 stores already, and in the last fortnight, its sales have increased by 15% as people are beginning to return to the office. And certainly, if anybody's done a walk around the City of London in recent weeks, they can confirm that there is a real buzz back in the cities now and in our towns and city centres. Sticking with the theme of retail, Ardent, the US-based real estate investment and asset management firm that acquired Touchwood back in July, that's Touchwood Shopping Centre, they've signed new leases for that shopping centre already, and that includes brands like Tag Heuer, Miele, Accelerate Gym, Handmade Burger Company, and local brands Dirty Wild Wings and Alioli, and that's over 20,000 square feet of new space. Those deals really sort of quickly follow on from that acquisition, and that includes the appointment of a new asset management team, and that's really sort of driving quite proactive improvements in a market that kind of has seemed a little bit stagnant, actually. It's great to see companies like that really beginning to make their mark known very, very quickly. Some of those tenants actually that I've listed off there, they're going to be at tomorrow's Completely Retail Marketplace event, which has well over 2,000 people registered to come to that. So that's going to be one of the biggest events. And that's going to share insights that people have gained over the last year. After the last year or so, that the industry is buzzing to be back in an in-person event. And I certainly was at the RLI Awards ceremony last week, which saw over 200 people in a black tie event, which is quite something to behold when you've not been out in a black tie for such a long time. But it was great to see, some of the biggest players there as well, people like Nuveen and Brookfield, who picked up awards. And lastly, the Northern Line extension in London on the Tube has opened up in Battersea and Nine Elms. That's 2 new tube stations on that line. But that Northern Line extension is the first addition to London's Underground this century, and is being delivered through a £1.1 billion investment programme from TfL. So a major milestone for Battersea Power Station. It was good to see people like Sam Cotton from Battersea Power Station down there. That infrastructure investment has also kind of triggered investments from people like Greystar, Moda Living, R&F Properties, London Square, and many, many others. So it's great to see that finally open, and London really kind of ticking over now.
Yeah, it's interesting to see those infrastructure developments. And also you mentioned their live events, Dan. Also good and positive to see those coming back. This week I'll be in Frankfurt moderating an event, and also in Lisbon. Nicole, what have you been watching?
Well, on the subject of cities that you were both mentioning, cities coming back very much so after the pandemic, Real Asset Media had an event, an investment briefing on repurposing city centres. Experts seem to agree that cities are going to become more polycentric in future in a post-pandemic Europe, but the city centre will retain very much its important role. Stuart Patrick, the chief executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, describes city centres as showrooms for local culture and experience that you can't have elsewhere. So there's a sort of dual effect. They're not mutually exclusive trends. They are going to continue to coexist. During the pandemic, people have rediscovered their neighborhoods and the sense of community, and that's going to carry on. All the convenience, we've talked about it before, the convenience of the 15-minute city where you can cycle or walk to almost everything you need. People also flocked back to the city centres as soon as lockdowns were ended, as soon as they were allowed to do so, because of the special nature of the socializing and the experiences that you can have in city centres. Herman Koch of Landis said that the social aspect of city centres is crucial, and he said it's very much about the sense of identity of a city and the people living in the city. And he said, obviously, now you can buy anything on the internet, and we have shown that we can work remotely, but you can't replicate that kind of community spirit online. Glasgow is a particularly interesting case study. It's a city that, as we've mentioned before, has done a lot on the sustainability front. And of course, now it's very much in the international spotlight. It's going to host COP26, the big UN summit on climate change in November. So they've been very proactive in the past, not just in the run up to COP26, but now their aim is to double the number of people who live in the city centre. And they've also got together a city centre task force, they're called, with local authorities, the Chamber of Commerce, business, very much a public-private partnership, and also inputs for the Edinburgh government and the London government to sort of think long term and have a long-term repurposing strategy for the city centre, which involves turning retail and offices which are not used into residential, but also it's wider than that. And basically the aim is for the summit to have a very long-term positive impact on the city, not just to be something that comes and goes. And on the subject of city centres and what to do with them, at the summit, Sabine Georgi of ULI Europe, she presented exclusively a new book that's coming out later this year that ULI did based on a Europe-wide survey about the 10 points to be done to build resilient cities. She also mentioned this fact of the multicentric city, with neighbourhoods being important and the centre retaining its importance as well, looking at the internet in different ways, and obviously the sustainability angle, and the multiple uses of open spaces. She said what's very important about city centres is that reclaim open spaces in different ways, so use City Square to become venues for all sorts of things, both cultural activities like open air theatre, but also markets, and obviously socialising. In the long term after the pandemic, I think we all prefer to be in open spaces rather than closed ones. But obviously the future of city centres will very much depend on the future of the office. They're very closely interlinked. If people go back to the office in big numbers, as we've seen, then obviously that's going to be good news for city centres as well, which depend on this interaction of sort of work and leisure and residential. So it's all working together to do well. And Stephen Lewis, Managing Director, HVD Property Group, they're building the biggest office ever built in Glasgow centre. And they said they're having very good demand, which shows how resilient the city is, but also the new trends. Occupiers want wellness, sustainability and efficiency. So good, healthy buildings to live in that people will want to go back to. Jarek Moravsky of Groven also said that understanding what people want from the city centre will be the biggest long-term challenge, because work patterns are definitely going to change. There will be less commuting, more livable city, less noise and less pollution, and sustainability will be the main topic. But it's very difficult because we're still in a post-pandemic transition phase. Very difficult to tell exactly what that pattern will look like.
And it was interesting, you can begin to see some of those things coming through as well. I noticed that Mark, obviously formerly known as Meyer Bergman, is planning to launch a sustainable Paris-focused regeneration platform, which is going to be aimed at regenerating assets with value-add potential as mixed-use properties. But interestingly, picking up on those points, Nicole, with a strong environmental credentials, which also have social impact. It was interesting to note as well that the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK has put forward a report clearly saying that construction companies should stop knocking down buildings just because that creates a huge amount of CO2 and embedded carbon, and that's a discussion that we'll continue seeing, I think. And it was also interesting to note CBRE Global Investors changing their brand so that they will be unified under CBRE Investment Management. But thanks very much for joining us, Nicole. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next week for our regular roundup of the real asset markets.